I went camping alone that weekend because I needed a break. My head was full of noise from work, emails piling up, and people constantly asking for things. I'd been putting off a solo trip for too long. I wanted a place where no one could reach me, where I could listen to the wind through the trees and nothing else. I picked a spot that was a few hours' drive north of home, a place I found on a forum where people talked about lesser-known camping areas. It wasn't an official campground, just a clearing someone had mentioned deep off a Forest Service road. They said it was quiet, not many people ever went out that far, and that it was right beside a lake. I loaded my old Honda with my gear, tent, stove, food, water, sleeping bag, hatchet, fishing rod, and a few other things. I didn't bring a gun. I don't usually feel like I need one, and it just adds weight. The drive up was smooth until the last stretch. The road turned to gravel, then dirt. I had to go slow over potholes and fallen branches. My GPS gave up about 30 minutes before I reached the turnoff. After that, I was going by screenshots I'd taken from the forum. It took me almost an hour to find the clearing, a spot that looked like it had been used once or twice a year, if that. Grass was growing in tire tracks. There was an old fire ring made of stones, and a log someone had dragged over to sit on. I set up camp. I took my time, laid the tent out flat to check for holes, staked the corners down tight, and set up the rain fly. I unpacked my cooler and stove, got some firewood from a bundle I'd brought, and walked down to the lake. It was exactly what I wanted. Clear water, no people, no noise, just the sounds of birds, insects, and a breeze. I even saw fish near the shallows. The first night went fine. I made a small fire, cooked some food, sat and watched the stars. It cooled down fast after dark, but I had layers. I fell asleep in the tent easily, the sound of the lake lapping at the shore not far off. I woke up once that night to a sound, a dull crunch like something stepping on dry leaves. I waited, holding my breath, but I didn't hear it again. I assumed it was a deer or raccoon. I went back to sleep. The next day I went fishing. Didn't catch much, but I didn't care. It was sunny, and the light off the water was nice. I explored around the lake too, bushwhacking a bit to get a better look at a beaver dam across from where I was camped. My boots got soaked in the muck, and I had to wring out my socks when I got back. But it felt good to move, to sweat a bit, to be out in the middle of nowhere. That night, I made another fire. I sat watching the flames for a long time. I remember thinking how perfect the silence was. Not total silence. There were frogs, crickets, leaves rustling, but no cars, no voices, no phones. It was after I'd put the fire out and crawled into my tent that something felt different. I just zipped the sleeping bag halfway and was lying back when I felt it. Not heard, felt. A kind of pressure, like something wasn't right outside. I laid there, trying to calm myself. But then I heard that same crunch as the night before. Dry leaves, closer this time. A few steps, then nothing. I didn't have a flashlight in my hand, so I slowly reached for it. When I turned it on, the beam hit the wall of the tent and lit it up. I saw nothing through the fabric. I held still, then a breath, not mine, a quiet, slow exhale from just outside the tent. My heart was pounding. I stayed still for what felt like 10 minutes. Then I shouted. I yelled that I was there, that I was armed, that I would call for help. I didn't hear anything move away, but the breathing stopped. Eventually, I forced myself out of the tent. I swung the flashlight in wide arcs. Nothing. No one. No footprints around the tent. I walked the tree line, checked near the fire ring, scanned the lake's edge. I saw nothing. I barely slept. I kept the hatchet in the tent next to me. Every sound made me jump. When the sky started to lighten, I was already packed. I didn't make breakfast, didn't sit by the water. I just threw everything into the car and started driving. But I didn't make it out. About 15 minutes down the road, I hit something. Not a big crash, but a sharp bump, like driving over a log I hadn't seen. The car jerked and stopped. I got out and looked. My back tire was flat. I must have run over a piece of rebar or something left from logging equipment. The tire was shredded. I had a spare, but it was one of those space savers, and I didn't trust it for the kind of road I was on. I jacked the car up and swapped the tire anyway. I started driving again, slower this time. I had no cell signal, so my plan was just to get to a better road, then try to call for help if I needed it. But not long after, I saw something in the road. At first, I thought it was an animal, but when I got closer, I realized it was a pile of branches, deliberate, set there across the road. I stopped the car and got out. The branches were dry, twisted together in a way that didn't feel accidental, like someone had been waiting and pulled them across after I passed that spot before. I cleared them fast, nervous. I kept turning around, expecting to see someone in the trees. I didn't. I drove faster. The sun was higher now, maybe mid-morning. I thought I had maybe 20 more minutes until I hit a better road. Then I saw something else. My old cooler, the one I'd used the day before, sitting on the side of the road. But I'd packed it. I was sure of it. It had been in the back of the car with the rest of my stuff. I pulled over and got out, opened the back. Everything was there. My cooler was still in the car. This one was the same model, same color, but dirty, scratched, old. I walked up to it slowly. There were deep gouges in the plastic, like from a knife. The lid was missing. Inside, there were bones. Not big ones, maybe from a rabbit or raccoon, but clean, like they'd been boiled or left out long enough to get picked clean. That's when I knew someone had been watching me. I got back in the car and drove. I didn't stop. When I finally reached the paved road, I felt like I could breathe again. I pulled into a gas station a half hour later and sat there, just sitting. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Someone breathed outside my tent? Someone left a cooler on the road? They wouldn't take it seriously. I never went back to that spot. I deleted the screenshots from the forum. I didn't post about it. I stopped going out alone for a long time. Even now, I don't know what they wanted, whoever was out there. I just know they were close, they were watching, and they wanted me to know. And they'll probably do it again to someone else. That trip didn't end with a fight or a chase or some huge moment. It ended with me getting away because I left early, because I got scared and trusted that fear. Whatever was out there, I don't think they wanted to be seen. They wanted to play with fear to show just enough. That was enough for me. I got the message, and I've never camped off-grid alone since. I went on a camping trip in mid-October, alone, deep into a national forest I'd never been to before. I'd heard about it from a coworker who used to go out there in his 20s. He said it was one of those spots with almost no visitors, no ranger stations, and no cell signal. That was exactly what I was looking for. I needed a break from everything. Phones, computers, people. I wanted quiet. Just me, the woods, and the cold autumn air. I planned it out pretty thoroughly. I packed a large frame backpack with all the gear I thought I'd need. Tent, cold weather sleeping bag, portable stove, food, water filters, a small hatchet, and a good flashlight. I also brought a cheap compass and paper map in case I got turned around. I drove 5 hours to reach the edge of the forest. From there, I followed a narrow forest road that wound deeper in. The pavement ended after a few miles, and I kept going on gravel. It had rained a few days before, so the road was soft and muddy in places, but nothing my old Forerunner couldn't handle. I found a place to pull off near a dry creek bed. The area was flat and had a mix of hardwood and pine trees. I parked off the road behind a line of trees so the car wouldn't be visible. Then I strapped on my pack and started hiking in. I didn't follow a trail, there wasn't one. I just moved southeast, according to the map, toward a small lake that looked completely isolated. It was slow going because of underbrush, fallen logs, and wet leaves, but after about 3 hours I made it to the lake. It was perfect. Still water, not a single sign of recent human activity, and enough dry space around the shoreline for me to set up camp. I picked a spot with a small rise that gave me a good view of the lake but was sheltered by trees. I set up my tent, gathered some deadwood, and made a small fire ring with rocks. The temperature dropped fast once the sun started going down. I cooked a basic dinner on the stove and sat near the fire for a while, listening to the sounds of the forest. Leaves falling, small animals moving in the brush. I felt calm for the first time in weeks. That night, it was cold but quiet. I didn't sleep great. Hard ground, a bit of wind, but nothing strange happened. The next morning, I boiled some water for coffee and walked around the lake. I saw deer tracks near the muddy edge and a few fresh scratches on a tree, probably from a buck rubbing its antlers. I saw no sign of people. That day I explored a bit more, made some notes on my map, and fished a little even though I didn't catch anything. I went to bed early, sometime around 9. I woke up just past midnight. It was one of those moments where you snap awake for no reason. No sound, no dream, just eyes open and you're alert. I lay there in the dark, trying to figure out what woke me up. The fire was long out. The forest was still. But something felt different. The air felt too quiet. Not the kind of quiet where everything's calm, but the kind of quiet where things are holding their breath. I stayed still in the bag, listening. I started to hear footsteps. Not constant, not fast. 1 or 2 slow steps, then a long pause. They weren't from an animal. I've been in the woods enough to know how 4-legged animals sound. This was 2 feet walking on wet leaves. Slow, deliberate. The steps circled the tent once, then stopped behind it. I could hear breathing, quiet and steady. I didn't move. I didn't even reach for my flashlight. I knew the batteries were inside the pouch on the tent wall, but I wasn't going to make a sound. The breathing stayed for maybe a full minute. Then the steps moved away. They didn't run, just walked slowly back into the trees. I stayed awake until dawn. As soon as there was enough light, I unzipped the tent and got out. I checked the ground all around. There were faint impressions in the leaves behind the tent, human-sized prints. Not boots, bare feet. I felt sick looking at them. I didn't see where they went. The leaves had been disturbed in too many directions. I wanted to leave right then, but I told myself it could have been a hunter. Maybe someone camping without a tent. Maybe they were just checking me out and left. I forced myself to stay another night, telling myself I was overreacting. That day, I didn't go far. I kept near camp, gathered extra wood, made sure everything was packed so I could leave quickly if I had to. That night, I didn't make a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. I ate cold food and zipped up inside the tent before the sun had fully set. I kept my flashlight in one hand and the hatchet in the other. I didn't plan on sleeping. I didn't. It was sometime after 1 in the morning when I heard it again. But this time, it wasn't footsteps. It was whistling, a slow, broken tune. Not a song I recognized. Just 5 or 6 notes, off-key. Then silence. Then it would start again. I couldn't tell how far away it was. Sound carries weird in the woods. It might have been just past the trees or further down the lake. Couldn't tell. It went on for over an hour. On and off. Always the same pattern. Always slow, always broken. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I didn't turn on the flashlight. I didn't unzip the tent. I just stayed still. Right before dawn, it stopped. Just like that. No fading, no walking away. Just gone. As soon as the light came back, I packed. I didn't eat, didn't break down the fire ring. I jammed the tent into my pack and left. I made better time going out, but I kept stopping every few minutes to listen. I didn't hear anything until I got back to the car. But when I reached the car, something was wrong. Mud was smeared across the passenger window. Not just dirt or splashes, longhand smears, like someone had dragged their fingers across the glass. The door handle had scratches in the paint, like from fingernails or a knife tip. I opened the door and checked inside. Nothing was missing. Everything I'd left in the car was still there. The seats were dry, but the smell inside was different. A faint, rotten odor, like old meat or pond water. I drove out fast. I didn't stop until I reached the highway. I didn't report anything. What would I say? I camped out alone. Someone walked around my tent and maybe touched my car? They'd say I was paranoid. Maybe I was. But I know what I heard. I know those were bare feet. I know that whistling wasn't in my head. I haven't been camping since. I still go hiking, still spend time outdoors. But I stay on marked trails. I don't camp alone. I don't go deep into the woods where no one goes. Because someone is out there. They don't want anything. They don't take anything. They just watch. They wait until you're alone and they let you know they're there. That's all they do. But that's enough. Because once you've heard that whistling, you don't forget it. I still hear it sometimes, In my dreams, always just out of view. And I wake up just like I did that night, cold, still, and sure that someone is standing just outside the tent. I went camping in early November a couple of years back, just before the real cold kicked in. I picked a place about 4 hours north of where I live, somewhere far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone, but not so remote that I couldn't hike back out if I got injured or lost. I'd looked at the satellite images online and picked a spot about 6 miles from the nearest road, deep inside a stretch of forest that looked mostly untouched. The terrain was pretty flat, and there was a small creek running through the area, so water wouldn't be a problem. The drive up was uneventful. I left around 5 in the morning and reached the trailhead just before 9. I parked on a gravel pull-off that looked like it hadn't seen another car in days. There was no cell service, but that was expected. I left a note on my dashboard with the date and expected return time, something I always do when I hike alone. Then I shouldered my pack and started walking. The trail was barely marked. I followed an old logging road for a couple miles, then broke off into the trees using a compass and topographic map. The brush got thick fast. I had to push through low branches and step over logs that had been rotting for years. After another couple hours, I found a spot near the creek that looked good. It was flat, dry, and surrounded by enough trees to break the wind. I set up camp around midday. Tent first, then gathered firewood. The air was damp and cold, and it smelled like wet leaves and moss. Everything was quiet, except for the occasional crack of a branch or call of a bird. I didn't see anyone all day. The ground was covered in a thick blanket of leaves, and I didn't see any footprints besides my own. I made a small fire before it got dark and cooked one of those freeze-dried meals I brought along. I sat by the fire and listened to the woods. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't camped alone, but there's this moment when it really sinks in how far you are from anyone else. I was just a tiny speck in miles and miles of forest. If something went wrong, no one was coming unless I made it back to the road. I put out the fire before bed and zipped myself into the tent. It got cold fast. I had a good sleeping bag, but I still felt the chill in my bones. I lay awake for a while, listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind moved through the trees in long, slow gusts. Every now and then I'd hear something move in the leaves, but it was always far off. I drifted off sometime after midnight. In the middle of the night, I woke up. No sound, no dream. I just opened my eyes in the dark and felt alert. My body was tense like I'd heard something in my sleep. I stayed still, listening. It was dead quiet outside. Not even the wind was moving. That's what set me off. How quiet it was. Usually there's always something. A bird, a rustle, anything. But this was total stillness. I didn't move. I just waited. Then I heard it. A soft crunch, like a footstep on leaves. It wasn't near the tent, maybe 15 or 20 feet away. Then another, still slow, one step at a time. I felt my stomach twist up. It didn't sound like a deer. It wasn't heavy enough for a bear. It was slow, too slow, not the kind of movement you expect from animals. I stayed completely still. The footsteps stopped. Then, nothing. I don't know how long I waited. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. Then I heard another crunch. Closer this time. Same slow pace. One step. Pause. Another step. Still no breathing, no snorting, no other sounds. Just footsteps. Then it stopped again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I held my hatchet in one hand and flashlight in the other, but I never turned it on. I didn't want to give away my position. I just lay there, staring at the tent ceiling until the sky started to lighten. When it was bright enough, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The air was freezing. I looked around carefully. There were leaves disturbed in a few spots, but nothing I could confirm as a footprint. No tracks, no signs of an animal, but I knew what I heard. I considered packing up and leaving, but I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe a raccoon, maybe the wind. Even though I knew it wasn't, I stayed another night. I spent most of the day collecting more firewood and trying to keep busy. I didn't hike anywhere. I stayed near the tent. I set up a small perimeter of sticks and broken branches around the camp, thinking if something stepped on them, I'd hear it. I was jumpy. Every sound had me looking over my shoulder. I didn't eat much that day. I just didn't feel hungry. That night, I built a fire early and kept it going for hours. I sat close to it, wrapped in my jacket, watching the trees. When I finally put the fire out and got into the tent, I felt like something was watching. It wasn't a dramatic feeling, just a low hum of unease. I zipped up, turned off the flashlight, and waited. It was after midnight again when I heard it. This time it was louder, more distinct. 2 steps, then a pause, then 3 more, closer than the night before. I held my breath. I could hear the leaves being crushed. Then silence again. I heard a stick break to my left. Not a little crack, something solid. Then something brushed against the backside of the tent. Just a light sweep like a hand or a branch. I stayed frozen. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. I raised the flashlight but didn't turn it on. Another sweep, this time across the side of the tent. I couldn't take it anymore. I shouted and kicked the side of the tent hard. Silence. Then the sound of someone running. Not crashing through the woods, but fast, steady footsteps fading into the distance. I waited a full hour before I moved again. At first light, I broke down the tent in record time. My hands were shaking. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't even take my usual path back. I just moved in a straight line west until I hit the logging road. I kept looking over my shoulder, thinking I'd see someone following me. I never did. When I got to the road, I took out my knife and kept it in hand the whole way back to the car. The sun was fully up when I got there. I opened the car and threw my gear in. Then I noticed something. A pile of stones on the hood. Small ones, arranged in a perfect triangle. I didn't put them there. I hadn't seen another person in 2 days. No one should have known where I was parked. My stomach dropped. I looked around, saw nothing, and got in the car. I drove straight home. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't report it. What would I say? Someone stalked me in the woods and left a triangle of rocks on my car? I've been camping all my life, and nothing like that had ever happened before. I haven't camped alone since. I still go out sometimes, but always with someone else. Always somewhere with service. Always somewhere close to help. I don't know who it was. I don't know what they wanted, but they were out there, walking through the trees in silence, watching, getting closer each night. That's what gets me the most. Not that they were there, but that they waited. They didn't try to rob me or hurt me. They just wanted to get closer, like it was a game. And the worst part? They knew where I parked. They followed me. They got to my car before I did. They left a sign, just to let me know. They're out there, and if you ever go deep enough, they'll find you too. I had been planning that camping trip for a few months, thinking it would be the perfect way to unplug for a while. Things had been feeling too crowded lately. Too much time behind a screen, too many meetings, too many responsibilities stacked on top of each other. I'd always done short weekend hikes or car camping trips before, but this time I wanted to go deeper. I wanted a place far enough from cell towers and roads that I wouldn't even hear a passing engine. After digging around online for a while, I picked a spot out in the northern part of the state. It wasn't part of a maintained campground or anything, just public land that had some Forest Service roads leading to it, and a lake that didn't even have an official name on the map. I figured that meant it wouldn't be crawling with people. I packed light but careful tent, food for 4 days, a small hatchet, water filter, basic med kit, a small burner for boiling water, and some essentials like rope, a tarp, and a backup battery charger for emergencies. I had a laminated map of the area and marked down my route so I could keep track of where I was going. The forecast was clear for the next week, not even a hint of rain. I drove up early in the morning, left my truck at the end of one of the unpaved roads, and hiked in about 6 miles to a small clearing near the lake. It wasn't even a real trail. Most of the time I was following a path that looked more like it had been made by animals than people. A few times I had to backtrack when the terrain got too dense or confusing, but I finally made it to the spot I had in mind. The lake was beautiful, completely still, the kind of water that reflects everything like a mirror when the wind is calm. Pines crowded the edges, and the ground was mostly dry pine needles with just enough clear space to pitch my tent without a fuss. I set up, had some food, and spent most of the first evening just walking the perimeter of the lake, getting familiar with the area. The first night went by quietly. I fell asleep to the sound of insects and the occasional call of an owl. I woke up early, just as the sun was cutting through the trees. I boiled some water for coffee and sat by the lake, feeling good. It felt like I was finally getting what I needed, a total break from everything. That morning, I decided to follow the creek that fed into the lake, just to explore. I didn't take all my gear, just the essentials, my knife, some snacks, compass, and a water bottle. I followed the creek upstream for a couple of hours, moving slowly through the trees, stopping here and there to listen. Felt peaceful. At one point, I came across what looked like an old fire ring, just a circle of stones half buried in dirt and moss. No fresh ash or anything, but it looked like someone had camped there a long time ago. I kept going, making mental notes of turns and trees so I wouldn't lose my way back. Around mid-afternoon, I headed back toward camp. That's when I first noticed something that didn't sit right. A branch was broken low across the trail where it hadn't been before. It wasn't a huge branch, maybe 2 inches thick, but it was freshly snapped, the inside of the wood still pale and damp. It was about waist height and angled downward, like it had been stepped on or yanked down hard. At first, I told myself it could have been a deer or a bear, but I hadn't seen any tracks or heard any movement earlier. I stepped over it and kept going, but now I was walking slower, more alert. I looked behind me more than once. Back at camp, nothing seemed out of place, but I couldn't shake the weird feeling. I checked my tent, gear, everything. Nothing was missing or disturbed, but I still did a full loop around the site just to be sure. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking I was hearing footsteps. Not loud, not close. Just little sounds in the distance, like someone trying not to make noise but failing here and there. I told myself it was just animals. Maybe raccoons or something moving around in the brush. I kept the hatchet next to me just in case, but I didn't open the tent. I didn't want to feed into my own paranoia. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach turn. About 30 feet from my tent, near the tree lean, I saw a shoe print. Not a boot print, not something big like a hiker's shoe, but smaller, maybe a size 8 or 9. The weird thing was, it was deep enough that I could make out the tread, but the dirt around it was undisturbed. Like whoever left it had been walking slowly or standing still. There were no other prints nearby. Just that one, like whoever it was had stepped there and then disappeared. I looked around for a long time, scanned the trees, listened. Nothing. No voices. No movement. No sign of anyone. I decided to walk a wider loop around the lake, see if I could spot any more signs of someone being there. Candy wrappers, cigarette butts, anything. I didn't find anything else, but every time the wind shifted, I thought I was hearing rustling. Not just leaves blowing, but something more deliberate. I almost packed up and left that day, but I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that maybe the print had been there longer than I thought, and I just missed it before. That night was worse. Just after dark, while I was eating, I thought I heard something in the trees. Not animals this time, something more rhythmic. Not quite footsteps, but something with a pace to it. I turned off my light and sat still, listening hard. For a long time, I didn't hear anything. Then a soft knock like wood tapping on wood. It came from the direction of the fire ring I had seen near the creek. I hadn't seen any paths leading there. It wasn't the kind of place you'd stumble into by accident. And it was far enough from the lake that it didn't make sense for someone else to be camping out there. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake inside my tent, just listening. Around 3 a.m., I heard something walk past my tent. Slow, 1 foot at a time, crunching lightly through the pine needles. Then silence. No footsteps leading away. I waited until the sun came up before I moved. When I finally got out, I found 2 fresh prints. One just outside the entrance to my tent, another a few feet away. Same tread pattern as before. Still no other prints. Still no sign of where the person had come from or where they went. I packed up. I didn't even eat breakfast. I shoved everything into my pack and started hiking back out. I wasn't even trying to stay on the same route. I just wanted to get back to the truck as fast as possible. I followed the map close, didn't stop, Didn't drink water unless I absolutely had to. Every 10 minutes, I turned around and scanned the woods. When I got back to the trailhead, I felt this huge weight lift off me. I threw my pack in the truck, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute, catching my breath. Then I started the engine and drove. But the story doesn't end there. About a week later, I was still thinking about it every night. I kept seeing those prints in my head. I started wondering if maybe I'd imagined it. So I went online, started reading forums, searching the area I'd camped in. I found a thread buried deep in a forum for bushcrafters and off-grid hikers. Someone mentioned finding an old shelter made of branches about 5 miles west of the lake I was at. No tent, just a lean-to built up against a fallen tree. Inside were bits of clothing, none of it newer than maybe 10 years old. Someone else replied that they'd found animal bones nearby, cut clean like with a knife. No one ever reported seeing the person, but a few different people said they'd heard tapping sounds in the woods, sometimes at night, sometimes just after sunset. They called him the Quiet One. Not a legend or ghost story, just a name people had come up with for whoever it was living out there, watching people. I don't know if it was real. I don't know if it was just some off-grid loner who didn't want company, or something darker than that. I didn't see a face, didn't hear a voice, but I know what I heard. I know what I saw, and I'm not going back there again. Not because I think something terrible will happen, but because I don't want to find out what it looks like when it does. I don't want to see the Quiet One's face. I still go camping sometimes, but only in places with other people around. Campgrounds, parks with rangers nearby. I don't take those deep solo trips anymore. Whatever peace I thought I was going to find out there, it left the second I saw that footprint. Somewhere in that forest, someone's still out there, watching, waiting, living off the grid in silence. And maybe they've been there for years, and maybe they'll still be there long after everyone else forgets that lake even exists. I've always liked doing things alone, not in some poetic or mysterious way, just in the sense that I never got much out of crowds. I wasn't a loner in the antisocial kind of way. I had friends, a good job, and all that. But when it came to relaxing, resetting, getting my mind straight, I needed quiet. The kind of quiet you only get when there's nobody else around. That's why I started solo camping. Not backpacking with a group or setting up next to strangers in a big campground, but real solo stuff, going out into the forest, far off trail, finding places most people wouldn't go on purpose. It wasn't about being extreme or anything. I wasn't scaling cliffs or fording rivers or hunting elk with a bow. I just liked the stillness of it. Wake up with the sun, make coffee by the water, sleep with nothing but the sound of trees moving in the dark. I'd been doing that kind of camping for about 5 years by the time this happened. Never had any real problems. The usual annoyances: mosquitoes, wet boots, the occasional sketchy thunderstorm, but nothing more than that. The trip I'm about to tell you about started like all the others. I had a week off in late September, and I'd been eyeing a stretch of public forest land near a place called Pinecliff Lake, about 2 hours from my place. I'd found it on a topographic map. The lake wasn't huge, but it looked clean, spring-fed. There were no marked trails going all the way around it, but there were a couple of logging roads that ended nearby. I figured I could hike in about 3 or 4 miles, get myself away from any foot traffic, and set up camp on the far side of the lake, on the ridge side, where the trees looked dense and the elevation rose up behind it. The satellite view showed a nice little clearing at the tree line, just big enough for a tent. I packed my gear like I always did, light but thorough. Tent, sleeping bag, sleeping pad, a burner, fuel, enough food for 5 days, water filter, knife, extra socks, headlamp, batteries, tarp, rope, and a basic medical kit. I brought a small hatchet too, just for firewood. I double-checked the forecast. It was going to be cool, dry, low chance of rain. The kind of weather you hope for on trips like this. I drove out early Monday morning. Got to the end of the last logging road just after 10 a.m. There was nobody around. Not a single car. The road ended in a narrow, gravel turnout, overgrown with weeds and moss, clearly unused. I parked and locked up, then started hiking. The terrain was straightforward. Pine, birch, and spruce all mixed in together, patches of golden leaves on the ground. A few stretches of dense brush, but nothing too difficult. I followed the ridge line on the map, used a compass to keep myself generally west, and stopped a few times to check my bearings. Took me about 4 hours to get to the lake. I came down out of the trees into this perfect spot. Quiet, isolated, and totally still. The surface of the water was calm. The air was cool but not cold. I sat there for a while just listening. Not a single engine, no distant dogs barking, no voices. Just wind moving through the trees and the occasional bird call. I set up camp near the tree line. The clearing was about the size of a small backyard, grass mixed with pine needles. A few large rocks ringed the back edge, like the leftovers of a small rock slide from the ridge above. There were some signs that deer had moved through recently. Flattened grass and a few pellets, but no bear scat, no trash, nothing that suggested people had been there in a long time. That first day went like all the others. I made camp, boiled water, ate something hot, cleaned up, and turned in around sundown. I left the fly off my tent so I could see the sky. The stars were out. The air was still. I remember thinking it felt almost too perfect. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly. Not from a noise, just wide awake all at once. I lay there listening. Nothing. Then I realized what had pulled me out of sleep. The silence. Real silence. Not the natural kind, like the birds and wind had just paused, but the kind where it felt like everything had stopped moving at once. It didn't last long, maybe 30 seconds, but it felt wrong. Unnatural, like the forest was holding its breath. Then a breeze picked up. A few leaves shifted. A distant owl called out. Everything returned to normal. I told myself I was just overly alert because I hadn't camped in a couple months. I went back to sleep. The next morning, I hiked the ridge behind camp. I wanted a better view of the lake from above. The climb was steep and took about 30 minutes. At the top, I came out onto a high bluff, bare rock and dirt, with a sheer drop on one side and a view of the whole lake on the other. From up there, I could see how isolated I really was. Not a single house, road, or clearing in sight. Just forest, water, and sky. I stood there for a while. Then I turned around and spotted something about 100 yards off in the trees. A dark shape low to the ground. I thought maybe it was a bear at first, but it didn't move. I walked toward it slowly. As I got closer, I saw it was an old tent. Wrecked, moldy, partially collapsed. The fabric was torn, the poles bent and broken, and the inside was littered with rotting canvas and leaves. It hadn't been used in years, but somebody had camped there at some point. That wasn't what bothered me, though. What bothered me were the cut marks. On one of the poles, an old aluminum shaft, there were clean, deliberate cuts, almost like someone had tried to saw through it with a knife or hatchet. On the fabric near the zipper, the same thing, cuts, not tears. And on the tree behind the tent, there were old rope marks. Deep grooves in the bark where something had been tied and pulled tight. That shook me more than it should have. I looked around, scanned the ground. No bones, no trash, no signs of a struggle. But something had happened there. I didn't stay long. Back at camp, I tried to settle in. Read a bit, made coffee, walked the shoreline. But I couldn't get that image out of my head. That tent, cut up and left to rot. The rope marks on the tree. Why would someone tie something that tight unless they were trying to keep it from getting away? That night, it took a long time to fall asleep. I woke up sometime after 2 a.m. The moon was up, and everything had that pale, washed-out look. I sat up in my sleeping bag, feeling on edge. Something was different. The tarp I'd left strung up between two trees near the edge of camp was hanging loose. The rope had come undone. That wasn't a big deal. I hadn't tied it super tight. But what caught my eye was the stake I'd driven into the ground. It was gone. Not pulled out, not broken, just gone. I got out of the tent, walked around slowly with my headlamp. The beam picked up my breath in the cold air. No tracks, no prints, nothing moved. But I couldn't find the stake. I always drove them in straight, and I knew exactly where I'd left it. Now there was just a little square dent in the ground. I spent the rest of the night in my tent with the hatchet next to me. The next morning, I decided I wasn't staying the full 5 days. I gave myself one more night. I wanted to leave on my own terms, not scared off. But I made a plan. I packed everything except the essentials. I wanted to be able to break camp fast if I needed to. That afternoon, I walked the ridge again, just trying to keep busy. When I got back to camp, there were small pine cones scattered in a perfect line across the clearing, about 15 feet long, spaced evenly, like someone had placed them that way one at a time. I hadn't done that. I picked them up one by one, tossed them back into the woods, then packed the last of my gear except the tent and sleeping bag. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there with my eyes open, breathing slow, waiting for something. I didn't know what. Around 3 a.m., I heard it stick snapping. Not close, but not far either. Up the ridge. Something moving down the slope, stopping every few steps. Then silence. I held my breath. Another snap, this time to the left. Still far, but definitely closer than before. I couldn't see anything out the tent window, just shadows. Then the quiet came back. That same deep, empty quiet I'd felt the first night. It stayed like that until dawn. As soon as the light broke through the trees, I got up, broke down camp, and hiked out. No coffee, no food, just packed and moved. Took me less than 3 hours to get back to the truck. I don't remember stopping once. When I got home, I went through my gear. I never found that missing steak. I checked the bag 3 times, dumped everything out. It was just gone. I haven't camped alone since. I still go out sometimes, but always with someone else. Always in areas where I can see other people from time to time. I don't go off trail anymore. Sometimes I think about going back, just to check, just to see if that old tent is still up on the ridge. But I don't really want to know what I'd find if I did, because whatever happened up there, whoever made those cuts, placed those pine cones, snapped those sticks, they never left any other sign behind. And that's what scares me the most. Not that someone was there, but that they were so good at not being seen. It was the middle of June when I decided to take some time off and go camping by myself. I needed a break. Work had been nonstop for months, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me more and more every day. I hadn't taken a vacation in a long time, and something about being away from people, screens, and noise sounded like the right kind of reset. I didn't want a campground with other families and RVs. I wanted silence. I wanted to be surrounded by trees, dirt, and the sound of wind in the branches overhead. I picked a national forest a few hours away. I'd been there once before, years ago with a friend, but this time I planned to head in deeper, far past where the trails thinned out and the cell signal dropped completely. I didn't even tell anyone exactly where I'd be, just that I was going camping and would be back in 5 or 6 days. I figured I'd set up camp in a quiet valley, do some hiking, maybe fish a little if I came across a stream, cook some simple food, and just let my mind relax. I packed light but smart. Tent, sleeping bag, food for a week, water purification tablets, fire starting kit, small stove, knife, flashlight, map, compass, first aid kit. I'd done this kind of trip before, so I knew how to stay safe and comfortable. I had a small solar panel to charge my flashlight and watch if I needed it. I carried a bear canister for my food and brought bear spray just in case. I wasn't worried about animals. In all my time camping, I'd never had a real run-in with anything more dangerous than a raccoon. I got to the forest late in the morning. I parked my car on the side of a dirt service road, well off the main area, and made sure it was hidden enough that someone passing by wouldn't notice it right away. I strapped on my pack and started walking into the woods. I took a trail that faded after a couple miles and kept going deeper. I followed a creek upstream for a while, then veered off into the trees, keeping track of my direction with the compass and map. By late afternoon, I found a small clearing near a bend in the creek where the ground was flat and dry. Felt right. I set up my tent, cleared a little area for a fire, and gathered some dry wood. I took my time and didn't rush anything. I filtered water from the creek, boiled some of it just to be safe, then cooked a simple dinner of rice and tuna on the stove. When the sun went down, I sat by the fire and just listened. The air cooled off fast once the light disappeared. I heard the usual sounds, crickets, a few frogs, the occasional distant bird call, but it was peaceful. I hadn't felt that kind of quiet in a long time. Eventually, I climbed into my tent, zipped it shut, and fell asleep listening to the sound of the creek and the breeze in the trees. The next day was just as calm. I spent the morning walking along the creek, looking for interesting rocks or animal tracks. I didn't see anyone or hear anything that didn't belong in the woods. I made it a point to stay within a few miles of camp, just so I wouldn't push too far out and risk getting turned around. The forest felt open but also closed in, if that makes sense. Like it stretched forever, but everything was hidden. You could walk 30 feet in one direction and find a completely different little world. Fallen logs covered in moss, patches of ferns as tall as your shoulders, trees with bark peeling off in strips like old paint. On the third day, something felt slightly off. I woke up to the sound of a branch snapping. Not a small twig, but something thick. I froze. It was still early, barely light, and everything was foggy and damp. I stayed in my sleeping bag for a few minutes, waiting to hear more, but it was quiet again. I told myself it was just a deer or maybe a bear moving through. I didn't smell anything, and nothing had been disturbed around camp. But the sound had been close. I got up, made coffee, and walked a little perimeter around camp. I didn't see any tracks or signs of animals nearby, which was strange considering how loud that snap had been. I tried to shake the feeling off. I was alone in the woods. This was part of it. You hear things. You imagine more than what's really there. But by the afternoon, I had that same low-level tension crawling back up my spine. I couldn't explain it. I wasn't scared exactly, just alert in a way I hadn't been before. I started noticing how still the woods were. No wind, no birdsong. Even the creek seemed quieter. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, and I kept busy. I filtered more water, gathered wood, checked my gear. I ate an early dinner and climbed into the tent before the sun even dropped fully. I left my flashlight within arm's reach. That night I had trouble sleeping. I'd drift off, then snap awake without knowing why. At some point, I heard the same heavy branch sound again, farther off but still close enough that I could feel it in my chest. It wasn't constant, just once, then silence, not even bugs. I laid there for a long time, listening so hard that I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. By morning, I decided I was going to hike a bit further in the other direction, away from the creek, to see if maybe there was an animal trail or something I had missed. I strapped on my pack with a few essentials and left the rest at camp. I marked trees as I went with little notches from my knife. The terrain was harder than I expected. More rocks, steeper climbs, and I lost track of time. I'd meant to only go a mile or so, but I ended up going much further. When I turned around to head back, I realized I wasn't entirely sure which way I'd come from. I had my compass, so I knew the general direction, but the woods all looked the same. I started walking, retracing my steps as best I could, but the notches I thought I made on the trees weren't there. I started sweating even though it wasn't hot. I told myself to stay calm, to think. I knew the creek ran northeast of camp, so I aimed that way. After about an hour, I finally heard water. I followed the sound until I saw the creek, but it wasn't the same part I'd been near before. The banks were steeper, the rocks bigger. I was lost. I knew I could survive out there for a while. I had food, water purification, gear, but the realization that I'd gotten turned around, despite being careful, gnawed at me. I decided to follow the creek downstream, hoping it would lead me back to a familiar bend or feature I recognized. But what I found instead was worse. As I walked along the water, I saw something ahead, something man-made. At first I thought it was a piece of trash, maybe something left by a hiker. But when I got closer, I realized it was a tarp. A faded, dirty green tarp, tucked between some trees, partially covered in leaves and branches. I stopped. I didn't move closer right away. I just stood there, looking at it. It looked old. The edges were torn. There was a rusted tin can lying next to it, half crushed. Eventually, I stepped forward and moved a few branches aside. Underneath the tarp was a collapsed tent. Not just any tent. It looked like it had been there for a long time. Mold was creeping across the fabric, and parts of it were shredded. Inside, there were scraps of old clothes, torn up and weathered like they'd been through multiple winters. I didn't see any bones or anything like that, but I also didn't dig too deep. Something about it made my skin crawl. Whoever had camped there had either abandoned it in a hurry or never came back for it. I backed away and kept walking along the creek. The woods felt heavier now, like they were pressing in on me. I started glancing over my shoulder more often, even though I hadn't seen or heard anything. The further I walked, the less I felt like I was going to find my own camp again. And then I found the second one. This one wasn't as old. The tarp was newer, a dull blue instead of green, and the tent was upright, not clean but intact. There was a fire ring, black with ash, a few crushed cans, a boot torn at the heel. I didn't see anyone, but I didn't want to. I had the feeling whoever had set it up hadn't been gone for long. Or maybe they had. Couldn't tell. The place had that same feeling, like it had been left in a rush. I didn't touch anything. I turned around and kept walking. It took me the rest of the day, but I finally recognized the bend in the creek where my camp had been. When I got there, my tent was still there, but something was wrong. The firewood I had stacked was scattered. My pack was unzipped, and a few things were pulled out onto the ground. Nothing was missing, at least I didn't think so, but it looked like someone had been through it, carefully. Not an animal. An animal would have torn things up. This was different. The zippers weren't broken, just undone. My food canister was open, but the contents were still there. I cleaned everything up as best I could, but the unease wouldn't go away. I didn't cook dinner. I didn't light a fire. I just sat inside the tent with the flashlight on and the bear spray in my hand. I barely slept. The next morning, I packed everything up and left. I didn't even eat. I just loaded my gear and started hiking back toward the road. I didn't stop. I didn't rest. I followed the creek, then my compass, then the distant sound of the wind through a clearing that eventually led me to the edge of the forest. When I finally saw the spot where I'd left my car, I nearly cried. I got in, locked the doors, and